Welcome to Divisionalysis. I'm Fog, trying to answer the questions of accuracy. It seems like every time I would answer one question, I'd turn around a corner and there'd be another question waiting. I feel like I've finally got to the bottom of it all. Let's go. So we're starting where we left off at the end of the last video. So if you haven't watched the accuracy conundrum, then I strongly suggest that you go back and watch that, because you'll have no idea how we got to this point here. And this point here is the weapon handling profiles for every single one of the assault rifles. Now the profile, the blue line representing the track that the weapon system will take, and the red lines being the extremities of its accuracy window, where those bullets, as you're tracking along that blue line, could potentially land based on the weapon's accuracy. Now, I realized at the end of the last video, or at that time in my research, that the rounds on target were less to do with accuracy and more to do with our ability to keep that blue line within the bounds of the target. So essentially I had to put these profiles through a number of human filters, if you would, as to how we go about keeping that profile within the bounds of the target. Now I've got the FAMAS here. I'm just going to shoot it at the wall, letting it follow its natural track. Or I'm going to swap over to the AKM and do exactly the same thing. As you can see, the AKM fires on a natural track all the way to the roof, so the distance that it travels during its weapon path is much longer than the FAMAS. If I control the vertical nature of the weapon, I find it just as easy to adjust for the AK as what it is for the FAMAS. And that's because the distance that's travelled by the AK occurs over a longer period of time. So my reactions are able to keep up with it better. So the very first adjustment that I made was based on time. So I used the 900 round per minute weapons as the reference point. Could have used any weapon, but I used those because there were more of them, which meant less adjustments that I needed to make. So if we compare those to the AK variants, the CTAR FAMAS fire 15 rounds per second, the AK fires 10, which means when it goes through a time adjustment, it essentially means that the AK is only just harder to control within the bounds of the target as what the FAMAS is. If we look at the AUG, its horizontal movement during its first couple of legs actually happens very, very quickly. So I made sure when I was adjusting for time that it was proportionate to the amount of distance that had been travelled. And what you get is when all are adjusted for time, it looks like this. The percentages that they were adjusted just above them. But this is what they look like. Here they are before the adjustment, and here they are afterwards. I then had the next human input to take care of. When we're playing the game and we're trying to control within the bounds of the target, we are applying a pull on the mouse to counteract the pull of the weapon, the natural pull of the weapon. We're generally doing this in one plane. For the CTAR, we're pulling directly down. For the FAMAS, we're pulling down and to the left. And for the military AK, we're pulling down and to the right. So the next filter that I put them through was essentially an angle adjustment, where the profiles we were keeping as close to the center of the target as we possibly can. Essentially, we've adjusted for this angle. And what we get is an adjustment that looks like this. So when all of the handling profiles are adjusted to a vertical axis, this is what they look like. So the next adjustment that I made, it could have gone in the last video because it's a non-human characteristic. It's a characteristic inherent to each weapon system. And that is that every weapon system has a different rate at which it will bloom to its maximum inaccuracy. So here we're looking at the Eagle Bearer, and the Eagle Bearer, it takes 40% of its total firing time to reach its maximum inaccuracy. The next weapon, the Chameleon, it is essentially instantaneous, taking just 2 bullets to go from accurate to its maximum inaccuracy. And there's variance across all of the weapon systems. I tested this across all weapon systems by blowing up the reticle size and overlaying a grid across that reticle, seeing what the maximum bloom position was, firing again to see how long it took to reach that maximum bloom. So each of the weapon profiles had to be adjusted from the first bullet, which is always 100% accurate, to then its maximum inaccuracy, or the width of its accuracy profile. So when flare adjusted or bloom time adjusted, this is what the profiles now look like. So what I had now is essentially profiles. If I had 0 human input on a vertical rising weapon like the Chameleon or the Sitar, I could take that to the firing range and confirm. So I was feeling pretty confident at this point. I felt like I had a very accurate representation of accuracy, what the accuracy profile of that weapon system looked like. Then I had to move on to probably the most difficult human aspect, which is stability. How much stability am I providing that profile, and how much am I reducing it down to its smallest possible component through my mouse control? I started with the AK and the FAMAS. So the AK and the FAMAS without any attachments other than the magazine, and I just simply just went in and fired at nothing but the head. FAMAS first, followed by the AK. Just a quick check to see how much stability I was applying to the weapon. So I just quickly lined up, saw what I was doing on the target, and then just did some very rough calculations, just literally adding up how much I was reducing that profile by. What I quickly realized is that I was very close to being at 100% stability for the weapon system. So I was like, well, okay, how close am I actually getting to 100%? So I went back to the firing range and I took out the Glory Days and a P416. Same weapon system, except the Glory Days has the talent of being 100% stable. And I fired at the wall. So, can you guess which are the Glory Days and which are the P4? This is the Glory Days. This is the P4. This is actually every single assault rifle fired at the wall. Capacitor I fired twice because the first one I coughed, and the second one I pretty much could have killed an aim enemy through a keyhole. But this is literally every single weapon system fired at the wall. And when I did this, I had an epiphany. And at the same time, I realized that I had fucked up and I'd been thinking about this the wrong way. When we're firing, essentially, we're plotting the bullets every single time and we're making adjustments to essentially keep them in exactly the same spot every single time. And there is a variation around each one of those bullets. And that happens 50 times during the length of that profile. And what we're doing is we are reducing that profile, or that vertical rise, down to its smallest possible element, dropping all of those down to this. What we have is essentially a probability cloud for each one of those bullets. And this is what it looks like over the target. And where I'd fucked up is going back to the last video where I was looking at the safety distance. I was thinking about it in only one dimension because I was letting the weapon system just rise naturally. What I should have been thinking about it is in 2 dimensions. Every bullet being a probability that it's going to land within these dimensions. And the safety distance, 125% accuracy buff, is actually 125% area to the circle of probability. And what I thought was a 30-something% reduction was in fact 125% divided by pi being a 39% reduction in its diameter, which actually makes a lot of difference when it comes to firing at a target. Before, I said that accuracy had very little to do with rounds on target. As it turns out, accuracy is actually a major component to rounds on target. I left it in the first video because I thought it was important for you to realize the mistakes that I've made along the way when thinking about this problem. What we have is an attempt with the mouse to rectify the profile. We're generally doing this in one plane, which means that the horizontal variations that occur within a profile are very, very hard to adjust for. And so even though we correct the angle, we still end up with this horizontal displacement. And so the AUG has a widening of its profile. And so on the wall, we still had a kick out to the right of where the probability of me being able to contain that shot within the confines of the target reduced. And this is what we end up with, is weapon handling probability clouds for all the weapon systems. And when I ranked them according to accuracy rounds on targets, I was shocked. This was the ranking. Left to right, top to bottom. And number 2 was the FAMAS. I was like, this doesn't feel right, but I did do some further digging. And the FAMAS takes 50% of its magazine to reach its maximum inaccuracy, whereas something like the Honey Badger only takes 10%, about 5 rounds. And what that means is that the majority of the FAMAS's rounds at 100% stability are going to be in the center of the target. And although the Honey Badger has 5% better accuracy, the number of landed targets for the FAMAS is going to be greater. But I felt like I was giving too much credit to myself. I don't think it was accurately reflecting the fight in the assault rifle. And I knew that there needed to be some adjustments. But I did learn some stuff with this first attempt. I did learn that if you are exceptionally good with an assault rifle and are able to make multiple adjustments during the profile, you can considerably improve accuracy and rounds on target. Much harder to do with a controller, but with a mouse definitely possible, and especially with something like an Eagle Bearer or an AKM where you're talking over 4.5 seconds to fire all those rounds, which does give more than enough time to make multiple adjustments during the firing. I also learnt why the CTAR tends to do a lot better up close than what the Eagle Bearer does. Eagle Bearer misses a lot more shots, but why it felt like I was able to take down a target just as easy at long range. And that's because the majority of the Eagle Bearer's bullets will land within that middle profile, whereas the CTAR, having a worse accuracy, will spray its bullets evenly around that cloud. I also learned things about the capacitor, the M4 and the carbine, all of which have a very similar profile or cloud. But what you can see here is where the initial round starts. And that's why people will find the M4 a lot more comfortable than the other two rifles, because they both have a pull in one direction. And so the majority of the rounds actually land off center to where the initial aiming mark is, which is why the M4 is probably preferred by a lot of people, because that initial round is where the majority of the bullets will land. You can see here that the M4 and the carbine have very central clouds, which is why sometimes it can feel like the M4 and the carbine are absolute laser beams, because the probabilities have worked in your favour and all those rounds have landed exactly where you intended them to go. But there are other times where those probability clouds don't work in your favour and the weapon system can rock from one side to the other and feel less accurate. But I go back to my discomfort with the rankings, and what I realised my mistake was correcting the angle for all of the assault rifles. It wasn't an accurate reflection of what occurs. The CTAR has a distinctly vertical path. The FAMAS has a left to right incline, and it's harder to fight with that longer profile, and both of them fire their rounds in exactly the same amount of time. The CTAR, a lot more people will be comfortable with, because if you're like me, you're generally shooting for centre of scene mass, being the easiest part of the target to hit. And the thing is with the CTAR is if you misjudge the profile and the amount of fight that the weapon has, then what happens is your missed shot will end up somewhere around here, a favourable result. Whereas with the FAMAS, a missed shot, an equal amount of misjudgment, and your shot ends up out here. So I refined my process. I went back to the time normalized profiles, not angle corrected. I had a template set up for myself with all the accuracy circles, accuracy clouds for each bullet already programmed. I then set a template based on the stability of the weapon system. That was what I was going to reduce the size of the cloud down to. I then plotted the profile, essentially making myself a drawing pin board to stick all of my bullets to. Once I had that profile, I then went up to my bullet profiles, and I knew that the P4 was at 45% accuracy. So I also knew that it took 33% of its magazine in order to reach that 55%. So I did the first half, or the first third of the magazine first, plotting a descending circle size, and then the last portion of the last 2/3 of the magazine at full size. I then plotted all of those bullet clouds or bullet probability clouds along the weapon profile path, making sure that it was all evenly spaced across the full length of the magazine. This time around I was using each cloud representing 2 bullets, whereas before I had been doing 5. So once I had a full magazine profile, I then shifted that down to the cloud template. I then went back and plotted a mouse track path, went back and then just simply dragged every one of those profiles down onto the template using the mouse track path as the line of which they would be pulled into that profile. I did that for the entire magazine to produce the cloud for every single weapon. I even managed to get an accurate profile for the Bighorn using 5 of its different weapon paths. And this is what it ends up looking like. No particular order, but this is what the bullet pattern and probability clouds look like for every single assault rifle. During my further research, I even realized that there were differences between stability and accuracy within the same weapon. So the military AK and the black market AK have a different stability and accuracy to the AKM and to each other. The ACR and the ACRE are different, the ACRE just being better on both counts. The Honey Badger and the Savage Wolverine were basically the same. The M4 and the Pyromaniac were basically the same, and the P4G3 and the military P4 were the same. SIG and Mechanical Animal, TKB and Kingbreaker, and PDR and Test Subject were all the same. The biggest difference between the named weapon and the non-named equivalent, outside of specified talents, was the difference between the AUG and the Invisible Hand. Both of them have exactly the same weapon path. Both of them have exactly the same accuracy and stability. However, what the devs have done is they've changed the right hand kick for the AUG to be more bullets for the Invisible Hand, making it much smoother and much easier to control. And the cloud, as you can see, is quite different between its non-named counterpart, the AUG. So what I did is I then grouped them into like a tier list based on their overall area of their cloud. And this is what the clouds look like when they're all encompassed within an ellipse. And then this is that tier list. But that's not the full story. We can't just say that because the overall area is bigger. So what I then did is I then put another ellipse inside the outer circle to show where 90% of the rounds would land. And this is what that looked like. And then very clearly you can see in the center of most of these ellipses is a defined area where the majority of bullets will hit. And so I put a final ellipse over where more than 50% of the rounds would hit. And this is what we get. And when you do that, the overall area may be bigger in some parts, but there will be more rounds landed on target because of the accuracy of those inner 50% majorities. And when all is said and done, the final rankings look like this. There it is. Number 1, the burnout by a considerable margin, but it's got an asterisk next to it because you have to fire every single round in the magazine in order to be able to get that benefit. Otherwise, it's just a normal FAMAS. Coming in at number 2, effectively number 1, is the Honey Badger. The race across this top row was incredibly close. The FAMAS was one that took the largest drop when it was the inner ellipses were defined, and that I think directly reflects the fight that the FAMAS has. So the Honey Badger, with its exceptionally defined center aiming mark, along with the Savage Wolverine, very closely followed by the M4. Again, the M4 is likely to be preferred by some people because that first bullet is in line with where the majority of bullets will land. Carbine 7. The rail splitter took a bit of a dive after the central ellipse was stated. The rail splitter being a CTAR variant. Another hard pulling, fast firing rifle. But it does have a vertical track, which makes it easier to control. The capacitor, as you saw in the range, if probabilities go in your favour, the capacitor is quite an accurate rifle, assault rifle. The SIG, which I think might be a surprise to some people. The MK16, I know that there are a few people out there who like that. The PDR, test subject. And then we have the very stable ACRE and ACR. Now, it's one of those weapon systems that a lot of newer players are going to find favourable because it is the easiest to control because of its very high stability. We have the FAMAS, and then we have two weapons that are almost exactly the same. The F2000, and that includes the shield splinterer as well, and the CTAR. The F2000 only just pipping the CTAR, but again, the F2000 has a slightly offline profile, whereas the CTAR is directly vertical. Again, some people will prefer the CTAR because of that fact. Then the invisible hand, because of that adjustment to the right hand kick on the AUG, the invisible hand actually becomes quite a viable option as far as accuracy concerned. It even beats out the Glory Days at 100% stability, because the Glory Days has such a terrible accuracy, as in the attribute accuracy. The Eagle Bearer, then the Bighorn sneaks in there. When all of those profiles are plotted, it has a very big center ellipse. It's almost the same size as the AKM and the other AKs as well, just pulling in the opposite direction. Then we have the TKB, the AUG proper, the G3, again another weapon that many new players will absolutely love, the P4 because of its stability. FAL, not everyone's favourite. The G36, very, very stable, but the worst accuracy outside of the Chameleon. And there you can see the Chameleon, although every one of its shots is going to go where you ask it to go. It's just going to spray them everywhere within that balloon. So there you have it. Accuracy, stability defined for each of the assault rifles. What this allows me now to do is be able to put those over targets and actually define at certain ranges what percentage of those rounds are going to land on that target, giving us an accuracy percentage that I can then combine with my optimal range data and plug both of those back into the assault rifle rankings to come out with what is the best assault rifle in the Division 2. It is a lot of calculation, but the research portion is now done, which is really the hard part. The calculations just take time. But in summary, stability of a weapon and your ability to control it. So if you're new, adding stability to the weapon will get you closer to what these profiles look like. If you're a pro, just know the weapon's bullet or profile, the weapon's track and its pull, and the better that you are at it, the smaller that those ovals and ellipses become, but they can never get smaller than what the weapon's accuracy attribute allows it to be. So, eating my words on a couple of things. And I think the biggest one being where I said in my previous video that accuracy attribute has very little to do with rounds on target. And as we have found out, as I found out the hard way, it's exactly the opposite. Accuracy actually plays a very big part in rounds on target. So I hope that you found this helpful. I hope you appreciate the amount of work that has gone into this. It was a question that I didn't know that I was going to be able to answer, but I'm very, very pleased with the results. Hopefully you are as well. If you are, please give the video a like, and if you want to see more stuff like this, hit that subscribe button. I need to see the love. that is it from me. I will see you in the next one. Thanks very much for watching. Fog out.